Do not give a name to my portrait. I lost my name in the paths of my diaspora. Right, this is Haifa's lover. In his very eye he holds her and hides her. He's never been away from her. He still lives there, a root in her hills. Hello. Those are lines from a poem by Samih Masoud. And in this video we're going to talk about his book Haifa and Other Poems. Masoud is a Palestinian poet, an exiled Palestinian poet, part of the Palestinian diaspora, born in Haifa in Palestine, and then born in 1938, essentially exiled in Palestine when the State of Israel was established, and the collections, the poems in the collection Haifa are really centered on this experience of being a diasporic poet, of being exiled from his homeland. And he actually says this directly in the preface of the book. He says, "The poems in this collection are a reflection of visions and feelings that spring from my experience as a poet who's been driven away from his country, who copes with the hardships of life in the diaspora by reminiscing about his homeland on all occasions, nourishing his love of humanity and expressing his support of the oppressed all over the world, both directly and symbolically through his poetry. In composing these poems, I've been stimulated by my strong and intimate ties with my birthplace, Haifa, the city which occupies my mind and heart all the time, the city I bear like a tattoo in my eyes and heart. The poems are filled with pictures driven from my childhood days and my dreams about my homeland. My bond with Haifa remains a constant source of emotional and spiritual inspiration, and that is why the book bears its name." So, the poems in this book are not necessarily fantastic as poems. The imagery is not incredibly innovative. The sound of the poems, the rhythm of the poems is not necessarily great. But what's interesting about the poems is the way in which they deal with the sense of place. Not just in terms of Masoud's remembering of Haifa, remembering of Palestine, but his experience of exile as well. So I want to start, I'll give you this one, just called Why. I think this is an example of the not tremendously great artistic qualities of some of the poems. It's a pretty didactic poem, and like a lot of didactic art, like a lot of overtly political art, it sacrifices aesthetics somewhat in the interests of making its meaning. So this is the poem Why. Why do they steal our land, our soil, trees, churches, mosques, and all that belong to us? Why are the prayers banned in our Jerusalem? Why do they build a wall around us? Why is Abraham theirs and ours, their grandfather and ours, and they are our cousins? Who said he was here? Who said they lived here in the innards of our history? So it's okay. There's nothing especially exciting about it as a poem, but one of the things that we get in a lot of the poems is this deep sense of the significance of place. Sometimes that comes through more in a sense of this is meaningful to the poet persona more than it necessarily is to a reader, but we get that emotional component here. So this is the poem Haifa. Oh, my eternal love, lo, I come back to you again on the wings of clouds. Lo, I'm here with you. I tuck my heart into your beach and forget the remote exiles. I spell every part of you, the wave, the sea, the waves, the wind, and the trees, the dew's whispers in the morning, the winter spouts, and mirrors hanging on the wings of the wind, laden with tapes of scenic memories that bring the heartbeats back to the heart in the crowded life, and take me back to the past. In them I see all that I want to see, the quivering of my bygone days, sights loosened from the prophets' faces, around which I go morning and evening. O my city, whose tresses rise akin to yours above the passageways of heaven, and a tender bosom wherefrom the threads of light emerge. O my city, whenever I come to you, my pride and passion soar. I go into your mirrors as your waves wish me to. Never do I forget where my home was. I bear it as a tattoo in the eye along the paths of my diaspora. When I get there, I drop my face on its thresholds. I kiss it and go around it 7 times and more. From hidden nooks I gather the relics my mother left, laden with the sweetest memories I breathe in the breeze of my life. In its surroundings I hear my mother's melodious voice, trembling. It never loses me, it follows me, awakens me. I see my mother hugging me with her large bright eyes, hiding me in her eyes, her smile emerging as wide as the space. Mother quivered on an olden day, and I started crawling. Here I saw her, I spelled her face with love and affection. Lo, I've come to my house again after years and years. It is my joy, my desired passion. My heart flutters around it, goes deep into sorrows. I feel in its odor all that has passed. I go back, putting together the faces of those who had been here, and then were lost in the paths of humiliation. I weave sails to extend for them in the whole place. With these I fill my dreams and bring them back to the lap of Haifa, with the steps of a wild wind that lingers not. So, I think it's a really fascinating thing, this deep personal connection to place that is the driving force of so many of the poems in this collection. And one of the tremendous ironies, I think, is that the Jewish state of Israel has created the Palestinian diaspora. I mean, we are the people of exile. We are the people of the diaspora. I mean, from the Babylonian conquest, when we were taken from Jerusalem to Babylonia, and then from the second destruction of the temple in 70 CE, when we were sent out into the world away from Jerusalem, the Jews have been the people of exile, the quintessential people of exile. So much of our history, so much of our worldview, so much of our experience has been shaped by being exiled from the Promised Land. Now, I'm not a Zionist. I don't believe that the Jews should necessarily return to the ancient kingdoms of Israel, Judea, etc., etc. The state of Israel does now exist. It's a historical fact, and I accept that. I believe the Palestinian state should exist as well. And I don't want to get too far into the politics of this, but basically I believe that we should have Israel and we should have Palestine as secular democratic states. I think Israeli Jews, Palestinian Muslims have much more in common with one another than the conflict would let them believe. And in particular, because now Palestinians have become people of exile. They are dispossessed of their land in exactly the same way that the Jews had been. It's a profound irony, I think, that the Jewish people, the people of exile, the people of diaspora, have created another people of exile, another people of diaspora, and are unable to find connection with that, are unable to identify with that. But to turn back to Masoud's book, The other element of this is he does have a lot of diasporic poems. That is, poems set outside of Haifa or outside of Palestine. There's a lot of poems about his experience of being in other places, particularly Montreal. And in much the same way that the poems about being in Haifa are focused on the experience of place, the poems about being elsewhere, or about being in Montreal or wherever it is, are similarly concerned with place. But it is a kind of cataloging of place. That is sort of reflecting this experience of being in the place, but there's not the emotional connection that we get in the poems about Haifa. So we see this, for instance, in the poem Two Immigrants. And there are some French place names here, I think. Maybe not. Sort of. I think I can pronounce all the French place names in here because they're not especially French. I don't know. We'll see. I don't speak French, so Two Immigrants. We arrived at Avenue Green in the afternoon. The Montreal sun, as always in July, wore his bright tresses loosened with combs of flame. We sat at Lafayette. His coffee was boiling on firewood cinders. We sat, you and I, retold our tales, drank coffee, and sneered at the fiascos of Arab leaders. At length we went out and roamed from one place to another. Behold, we're now near Champlain Bridge. I stroll around it here with stiff knees as you walk beside me, swaying your glowing bosom with poise, hiding the sun from the banks of Saint Laurent and the bells of Notre Dame. We walked on and on beneath switched-off lights. Behold, we arrived at raucous corners that humor people with songs and innocent merriment. The night never leaves them, nor does the morning rise. We walk toward a memorial, riding above the shelves of the wind. Lo, we are beside it now, gazing at a bygone age, counting the faces of those who passed from here before us. The old conquering strangers and good old Mohawk and Cree Indians. Here they came before us, millenniums ago, filling Montreal's horizon and space. And here you and I now are walking, two immigrant strangers and the exiles of the diaspora, our dreams overflowing around us, looking for rainy clouds to bring back the pulse to the migrant birds. So again, it's a poem centrally concerned with locations and places. We get these place names: Avenue Green, Saint Laurent, Notre Dame, this street corner. All of these places, these physical markers of location, but they don't seem to have the emotional resonance that we get with the poems about Haifa. In these poems about being outside of Palestine, outside of Haifa, it's almost more like a mapping of space, a mapping of unfamiliar space in particular, rather than an emotional link, rather than a connection on a deeply felt level to these spaces and places, which we get in Masoud's poems about being in his homeland.